Imagine the streets of London, lined with faces from every corner of the globe, hearts beating in unison, as a golden carriage slowly turns a corner. Inside sit William and Catherine, not just a prince and his wife, but two people about to step into a chapter that will echo through history. It wasn't just an entrance, it was a moment that seemed to stop time itself. What did the world see in those few steps toward Westminster Abbey? Awe, wonder, and the very heartbeat of a nation. If you're already feeling the magic of this royal moment, you'll want to stay with us. We'll take you behind the scenes of William and Kate's coronation entrance, exploring the emotion, the tradition, and the sheer spectacle that left the world in lasting awe. So, if you enjoy stories that blend history with heart, don't forget to like this video, subscribe, and share it with someone who loves a good royal story. The first sign that this will be no ordinary morning was the stillness of the crowd. London is rarely quiet, but on this day, the air seemed charged, not with noise, but with anticipation. Then, almost like the opening of a great play, the sound of hooves on cobblestones echoed through the streets. The golden carriage had arrived. For those who had camped out overnight, wrapped in Union Jack blankets under the glow of lamplight, this was a moment they had been waiting for. Parents hoisted children onto their shoulders, elderly couples leaned against one another for balance, and strangers, who hours before had never met, found themselves united in a kind of reverent silence. And then, as the first glint of gold rounded the corner, the silence broke into cheers so loud they seemed to roll across the city like a wave. Inside the carriage, William and Catherine sat side by side. From the outside, they were the picture of elegance. William in his ceremonial military uniform, Catherine in her ivory gown embroidered with silver threads that shimmered with every movement. But what the cameras could not fully capture was the sheer magnitude of what they were feeling. Imagine, for a moment, looking out the window and seeing not hundreds, not thousands, but hundreds of thousands of people, all cheering for you, all believing they are witnessing history. How do you prepare your heart for that? Catherine, ever composed, gave a gentle wave, the kind she had practiced countless times before. But there was something more in her smile that morning, something unpracticed, something raw. Her hand, adorned with delicate lace gloves, rested lightly on William's, and those who caught even a glimpse could sense it. This was not simply a royal procession. It was a shared human moment, a couple holding each other steady in the face of the extraordinary. As the horses drew the carriage through London's historic streets, landmarks passed by like chapters in a storybook. Big Ben stood tall, its clock hands marking each second with solemnity, while the London Eye slowly turned in the distance, its cabins packed with lucky onlookers who had paid dearly for the perfect view. Flags hung from nearly every window, and flowers decorated lampposts and balconies. The entire city seemed to have dressed for the occasion, as though London itself knew it was about to be immortalized in memory. Yet for all the grandeur, some of the most powerful moments were found in the faces of the people. Children, their cheeks painted red, white, and blue, waved their flags with uncontainable joy. Tourists lifted phones high above the crowd, desperate to capture even a blurred glimpse of the carriage's gleaming frame. And elderly men and women wiped tears from their eyes, remembering the last time they had seen such pageantry, decades earlier, and realizing they were about to witness it once more. It wasn't only the British who gathered that day. The accents in the crowd told a different story: American, Australian, Canadian, French, Japanese, Nigerian. People had traveled across oceans for this single moment, reminding everyone that this was not just Britain's event. It was the world's coronation to share. And then there was the carriage itself, a spectacle of craftsmanship and history. Its golden panels reflected the sunlight like mirrors, so bright it seemed to glow from within. The interior, lined with velvet and silk, cradled its royal passengers in comfort, though one suspects no cushion could soften the weight of the moment pressing upon them. Pulled by a team of magnificent gray horses, the carriage seemed almost otherworldly, as though it had rolled straight out of the pages of fairy tale. Security was everywhere, though cleverly hidden. Police lined the route at every step, their presence quiet but firm, while others kept watch from rooftops, their eyes scanning the sea of people. It was a reminder that such beauty and ceremony always coexisted with careful vigilance. But to the crowds, it was invisible. All they saw was the unfolding magic. As the carriage drew closer to Westminster Abbey, the noise intensified. Songs broke out, Chants of support filled the air, and the atmosphere swelled into something that could only be described as electric. Imagine the sound of thousands of voices singing at once, not rehearsed, not in perfect harmony, but raw, passionate, and utterly unforgettable. That was the soundtrack of William and Catherine's approach. Inside the carriage, Catherine squeezed William's hand, a fleeting gesture that spoke volumes. She wasn't just a duchess stepping into history. She was a young woman who had once walked through the halls of St. Andrew's University, nervously catching the eye of a prince. William, in turn, looked at her not only as his consort but as his partner in every sense. Whatever awaited them inside those stone walls, they would face it together. By the time the carriage turned onto the final stretch, the crowds were pressed so tightly against the barriers that movement seemed impossible. People had been waiting since dawn, some since the night before, and now their patience was rewarded. They could see the ivory gown, the polished metals, the sparkle of a headpiece that caught the sun. They could wave, they could cheer, they could cry, and know that they were part of something larger than themselves. The bells of Westminster Abbey began to toll, their heavy bronze voices echoing across the city. For centuries, they had rung for coronations, weddings, and victories. And now, once again, their sound carried over London, mingling with cheers, creating a chorus of history and humanity. The carriage slowed, and the atmosphere seemed to hold its breath. For just a second, time felt suspended. William looked forward, his jaw set with a quiet determination of someone stepping into destiny. Catherine, radiant, exhaled slowly, her eyes reflecting both nerves and excitement. Together, they prepared for the moment when the doors of the carriage would open, and they would step into the history books. The carriage came to a stop before the great doors of Westminster Abbey. Silence fell across the crowd, broken only by the click of countless cameras and the echo of the bells above. This was it. The threshold between past and future, between tradition and renewal. And as William reached for the door, extending his hand as he had so many times before, first as a friend, then as a fiancé, now as a king-to-be, the world leaned forward. The golden carriage had brought them to the gates of history. What awaited inside would transform them forever. The heavy doors of Westminster Abbey swung open, and in that instant, the atmosphere transformed. Outside, the air had been filled with cheers, songs, and the roar of history in motion. But inside those ancient stone walls, the noise gave way to reverence. The hush was almost tangible, as though the abbey itself demanded silence from every soul within it. William was the first to step out of the golden carriage. His polished shoes touched the red carpet with quiet authority, and without hesitation, he turned to offer his hand to Catherine. It was a small gesture, one he had made countless times before, at doors, at steps, on occasion both ordinary and extraordinary. But today, in front of the eyes of the world, it became symbolic. A future king steadying his queen, not just for the steps before them, but for the journey of a lifetime. Catherine emerged from the carriage like a vision. Her ivory gown, embroidered with delicate silver threads, seemed to shimmer as it caught the soft London light. The headpiece glistened like a crown of leaves dusted in morning dew. For a moment, as she placed her hand in William's, the crowd outside erupted once again in cheers so thunderous it could be heard even through the thick abbey walls. Then, as they turned toward the steps, silence reclaimed its dominion. The world seemed to hold its breath. The climb into the abbey was slow, deliberate, rehearsed, yet somehow still raw with emotion. Each step carried the weight of nearly 1,000 years of tradition. Kings and queens had walked these same stones, their footsteps echoing across centuries. Wars had raged, empires had risen and fallen, yet Westminster Abbey remained, a witness to it all, a stage for destiny. Inside, over 2,000 guests waited. They had been seated with the precision of royal protocol, world leaders in one section, foreign monarchs in another, dignitaries and celebrities interspersed with British aristocracy and officials. Yet no matter their status, every eye turned as William and Catherine crossed the threshold. You could see it in their faces, reverence, admiration, awe. For a brief moment, the titles and positions of those inside seemed to dissolve, and they became what everyone outside already was, witnesses to history. The abbey itself was breathtaking. Fresh flowers filled every corner, roses, lilies, and white blooms chosen not only for their beauty but for their symbolism of purity and continuity. Their fragrance mingled with the centuries-old scent of wood and stone, creating a sensory tapestry unlike anything else. Banners of gold and crimson hung from the high ceilings, catching the light from chandeliers and stained glass, so that everything seemed bathed in a glow somewhere between sunlight and candlelight. And then there was the music. The organ's deep tones rolled through the air like thunder softened by reverence, while the choir's voices rose and fell with angelic clarity. Ancient hymns, sung countless times before, echoed once more, linking the present moment to every coronation of past. The sound was not just music. It was memory, history, and destiny woven together. William and Catherine began their walk down the long central aisle. Slowly, deliberately, hand in hand, they moved toward the altar. Television cameras captured every angle, broadcasting their journey to billions of people around the globe. In homes from New York to Nairobi, families paused their mornings, children hushed, and entire offices stopped working to watch this single, sacred procession. On social media, timeline flooded with images and words of wonder. Yet inside the Abbey, time seemed to move differently, each second stretched into eternity. Among the sea of distinguished guests, there were faces that meant more than any royal protocol ever could. Catherine's parents, Michael and Carol Middleton, sat in the front rows. Their eyes glistened with pride and disbelief. Could they have ever imagined that the daughter they had raised in Berkshire would one day walk this aisle to be crowned queen? For them, this was not just a coronation. It was a family's journey come full circle. William's father, King Charles, watched with a mixture of pride and solemnity. For him, this was not only the crowning of a son, but also the passing of a torch, one that had been held by his family for generations. His gaze lingered on William, perhaps seeing not just a king-to-be, but the boy he had once carried on his shoulders, now stepping into history. Everywhere you looked, there were stories written in faces. Foreign monarchs sat with regal composure. Diplomats exchanged glances of respect, and celebrities, so often accustomed to being the focus of attention, now seemed humbled to be part of something greater than themselves. As Catherine's train flowed behind her like a river of silk, carried carefully by young pages, the symbolism of the moment deepened. These children, chosen for their honor and composure, would forever be etched into history as part of this day. Their families, watching from the congregation, beamed with pride, knowing that children's small steps would be remembered for generations. Every detail of the walk had been rehearsed, down to the placement of feet and the rhythm of movement. And yet, no rehearsal could prepare William and Catherine for the reality of it. The way the air seemed to thicken with history, the way their hearts beat faster with each step, the way the world seemed to lean in, watching. As they approached the altar, the grandeur gave way to intimacy. William turned slightly, meeting Catherine's gaze. It was brief, no more than a second, but in that look was everything: love, determination, reassurance. The journey from university sweethearts to this exact moment, standing before the altar of Westminster Abbey, with crowns awaiting them, had been long, tested by scrutiny, shaped by duty. And yet, here they were, side by side, exactly where they were meant to be. The Archbishop of Canterbury stood ready at the altar, his ceremonial robes a reminder of the sacred role he would soon play. In his hands was the ancient crown, gleaming under the lights, its jewels catching every color of the stained glass windows. Its history was immense. Centuries of monarchs had felt its weight, not just of gold but of responsibility. Soon, that same weight would rest on William's head. The air inside the Abbey seemed to change as William and Catherine reached the final steps before the altar. Guests leaned forward ever so slightly. Cameras zoomed closer. The choir's hymn softened, its final notes floating up into the rafters like whispers. And then, silence. There they stood, William and Catherine, no longer just prince and princess, but future king and queen, poised at the threshold of destiny. The stones beneath their feet had seen it all: joy, sorrow, coronations, funerals, victories, defeats. And now, they bore witness again. For a heartbeat, the world seemed to pause. William inhaled deeply, his hand tightening around Catherine's. She exhaled, her gown shifting gently with the movement. Together, they looked ahead toward the altar, toward the moment that would define not just their lives, but the future of the British monarchy. And in that silence, one truth was clear: history was about to change forever. This chapter takes us from the hushed sanctity of the Abbey back into the open air, where history meets celebration. It covers. The carriage ride back to Buckingham Palace in the golden state coach, through streets overflowing with flags, cheers, and emotion. The atmosphere outside the palace, tens of thousands gathered shoulder to shoulder, waiting for that iconic balcony moment. The royal family's balcony appearance, William, Catherine, and their children stepping out, greeted by a roar so powerful it seemed to shake the palace itself. The symbolism of the balcony, a tradition that connects monarchs with their people in a single shared image. The global reaction, from social media trends to headlines around the world, proving that this was more than a British event. It was a worldwide moment of awe. The final wave, William and Catherine's last gesture of the day, crowned catching the golden evening light, before stepping back inside as the celebrations continued outside. The outro will serve as the emotional closing note, drawing the story full circle. It should reflect on how the coronation entrance and crowning will be remembered in history. Highlight William and Catherine not just as monarchs, but as partners stepping into their greatest duty together. Emphasize the balance between tradition and modernity, history and humanity. Leave the audience with a sense of awe and inspiration, like they have witnessed something timeless. End with a natural final call to action, inviting viewers to reflect, comment, and stay connected for more emotional royal stories. The hush inside Westminster Abbey deepened, settling like a velvet curtain over the congregation. Even the youngest children in attendance seemed to sense the gravity of the moment, their fidgeting stilled as the Archbishop of Canterbury stepped forward. In his hands, he carried words and traditions older than the stones of the abbey itself, the rites of coronation that had bound sovereigns to their people for nearly 1,000 years. William stood tall, his face composed, but his eyes revealed the weight he carried. Before him rested the St. Edward crown, a relic of history. Solid gold, encrusted with rubies, sapphires, and pearls, it gleamed under the light of the stained glass. To look at it was to see more than jewels. It was to see battles fought, empires built, and centuries of service and sacrifice. Its very weight, more than 2 kilograms, symbolized the enormity of the burden that came with it. The Archbishop's voice rang out, steady and clear, carrying through every corner of the abbey. Ancient hymns followed, echoing words spoken at coronation for centuries. The congregation responded in unison, their voices weaving a bridge between the present and the past. Outside, the crowd that had filled London streets fell silent as giant screens broadcast every word, every note, every pause. In homes across the globe, televisions glowed, and billions leaned in to watch. At the heart of it all stood William, bowing his head as prayers rose around him. The cameras caught every detail, the medals on his chest, polished until they gleamed, the gold braids of his uniform, the quiet strength in his expression. This was not just ceremony. It was a transformation, the moment when a prince became a king. Catherine, standing beside him, watched with tears brimming in her eyes. She had walked this long journey with him, from the quiet courtyards of St. Andrew's to the public glare of royal life, through joy and challenge, through the relentless scrutiny that came with their roles. And now, she was witnessing him take on the role he had been born to fulfill. For her, it was not only history unfolding, it was love, devotion, and pride crystallized in a single moment. The Archbishop lifted the crown high above William's head. A hush fell so complete that even the flickering of candles seemed louder. The crown descended slowly, deliberately, until at last it rested upon William's brow. And then, for a breathless instant, time itself seemed to stop. The abbey was silent, the city was silent, the world was silent. From the pews to the streets, from London to Lagos, from Sydney to San Francisco, all eyes were fixed on that single moment, the crowning of a king. Then the silence shattered. Cannons thundered from the Tower of London, their booms echoing like rolling thunder across the city. Bells from every church rang out in celebration, their ancient voices joining in a jubilant chorus. The crowds outside erupted, flags waving, cheers rising like a tide that swept through the capital. It was not merely sound, it was history announcing itself. Inside, the congregation rose to their feet. Applause rang out, mingling with hymns and the soaring notes of the choir. William lifted his gaze, his expression a mixture of solemnity and quiet strength. He was no longer simply Prince William. He was King William, a monarch stepping into the weight of centuries with the hopes of millions resting on his shoulders. Yet this coronation was not complete without Catherine. The Archbishop toned, holding in his hands the Queen Consort's crown. Smaller, more delicate than William's, it sparkled with diamonds and sapphires that seemed to catch the very light of heaven. Catherine knelt gracefully, her gown spreading around her like the petals of a flower. Her head bowed, her hands steady. She awaited the crown that would transform her from Duchess to Queen. As the crown touched her head, Catherine closed her eyes, overwhelmed by the enormity of the moment. In that instant, memories flickered across her mind. Her childhood in Berkshire, her parents' unwavering love, her university days where she met the young man who would change her life. And now here she was, crowned queen in the same abbey where monarchs had been anointed for nearly a millennium. Her parents, seated in the front rows, could not contain their tears. Carol Middleton dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief, while Michael sat stiffly, pride radiating from every line of his face. They had raised their daughter with kindness and values, never imagining that she would one day wear a crown. The congregation erupted once more into song. God Save the King filled the abbey, its words sung with such force that even the thick stone walls seemed to vibrate. 2,000 voices joined as one, while beyond those walls, hundreds of thousands echoed the anthem in the streets, and billions hummed or sang along in living rooms, offices, and squares around the world. The sight was breathtaking. William and Catherine, side by side, their crowns catching the light as they turned to face their people. They stood not only as monarchs, but as symbols of unity, continuity, and hope. Every camera captured their smiles, their steady presence, their quiet determination. Already, social media feeds around the globe were flooding with images and words of awe. A new era begins, a fairy tale moment, history before our eyes. Hashtags surged, photos trended, and yet, for those within the abbey, it still felt like something sacred, something almost untouchable. The service continued, each hymn, each prayer carefully chosen to honor both tradition and the couple themselves. The choir's voices soared, cascading like light from the high ceilings, while the organ's deep notes grounded the ceremony in reverence. Catherine's gown trailed like liquid silk as pages shifted its folds. William's crown sat heavy yet steady, the embodiment of duty accepted. At last, the coronation drew to its formal close. The congregation rose once more, applauding with reverence. William and Catherine turned together, their steps steady as they began to walk back down the aisle. But now, everything had changed. They entered as prince and princess. They left as king and queen. Guests bowed and curtsied as they passed, world leaders, dignitaries, and fellow royals offering their respects. Catherine's smile was radiant, her eyes glistening with emotion, while William's composure reflected strength and resolve. Together, they walked as equals, as partners, as monarchs. Outside, the celebration surged. The news spread like wildfire across television screens, smartphones, and radios. Britain has a new king and queen. Fireworks were prepared. Songs broke out spontaneously, and people hugged strangers in the streets. Inside the abbey, though, as William and Catherine reached the great wooden doors, there was one final pause. They turned back, their crowns gleaming, their faces illuminated by the golden light of the abbey. For a moment, they simply stood, taking in the sight of the place that had crowned them, that had linked them forever with the history of their nation. And then, with steady steps, they moved forward. The doors creaked open. Light flooded in. The sound of the crowd roared back into their ears, louder than ever before. King William and Queen Catherine were ready to step out, not only into the sunlight of London, but into the pages of history itself.